porcelain vase didn't just shatter. It exploded inches from Karen's feet, the sound echoing like a gunshot through the hushed, sterile air of the boutique. Shards of expensive ceramic and cold water sprayed across the marble, but she barely felt the sting on her ankles. All she felt was the familiar, predatory shadow of Gary looming over her. She stumbled back, her hands flying instinctively to her 7-month pregnant belly, her body curling into a protective arc to shield the life kicking frantically inside. "Look at this mess," Gary's voice boomed, dripping with a rehearsed public cruelty that made the nearby shoppers freeze mid-brows. He looked every bit the success he'd stolen the right to be: tailored suit, polished shoes, and an arrogance that filled the room. He stepped into her personal space, his finger pointing like a loaded weapon mere inches from her face. "Did you really think you could just waddle in here and blend in a dress that looks like it came from a donation bin?" Karen pressed her palms against the cold, polished floor, trying to find her center of gravity, but her arms trembled under the weight of her fear. Around them, the high-end clientele didn't step in to help. They lifted their phones, lenses gleaming like cold eyes, ready to capture the poor pregnant woman making a scene in a world she didn't belong to. "Stay down there, Karen," Gary hissed, his mocking laughter vibrating in the air. "It's a better view of the life you'll never have. You're a stain on this marble." He didn't know that the floor he was standing on didn't belong to the boutique. It belonged to Anton. And he certainly didn't know that Karen's thumb was already pressing the silent signal on her phone, a direct line to a power Gary couldn't even fathom. The porcelain vase didn't just shatter. It exploded inches from Karen's feet, spraying cold water and jagged shards across the white marble floor. Before she could even gasp, Gary was looming over her, his finger pointing like a loaded weapon while his mocking laughter echoed through the sterile, high-end boutique. He sneered at her simple dark green maternity dress, a stark contrast to his tailored brown suit, and began recording her on his phone to ensure her social ruin was permanent. Karen stumbled backward, her hands flying instinctively to her 7-month pregnant belly as she tried to shield the life kicking frantically inside her. The humiliation burned as Gary mocked her poverty, his arrogant stance reflecting a predatory cruelty meant to crush her spirit in front of the silent, starring shoppers. The cold marble bit into Karen's palms as she struggled to breathe, the weight of Gary's mockery pressing down on her more heavily than the child she carried. As she looked at the jagged shards of the vase and Gary's gleaming phone lens, the painful truth crystallized. Her 6-month experiment with a quiet life was officially over. She realized she could no longer protect her daughter with simple normalcy or stubborn pride. Without looking up, her hand moved with practiced muscle memory to the smartphone gripped in her palm, finding the one contact she had sworn never to touch again. She activated the high-priority distress signal, a silent digital cry for help that bridged the distance to the man she had spent half a year running from. Anton's world was dark and dangerous, but as Gary's laughter filled the boutique, she knew it was the only power capable of ending this nightmare. The signal was sent, a direct link to the man who would burn everything to find her. The atmosphere inside the boutique changed with the heavy finality of a tomb as the electronic hum of the grand glass doors signaled their last movement, locking from the outside. Outside, the street erupted into a choreographed display of absolute authority as a fleet of black luxury sedans swerved into the curb in aggressive synchronization. Before Gary could process the disruption, 6 elite bodyguards clad in identical black suits and dark sunglasses moved with lethal, unified purpose. They didn't just walk into the store. They occupied it, positioning themselves in 2 rigid lines to create a human corridor through the center of the marble floor. Every head in the boutique turned as Anton stepped out of a final armored door, his silhouette cutting a jagged edge against the afternoon sun. He walked through the corridor of his men, his rhythmic footsteps echoing like a countdown against the polished floor, his eyes fixed on nothing but Karen crumpled at Gary's feet. Gary's face twisted in a mask of indignant fury as he squared his shoulders, attempting to reclaim the room from the wall of black suits. "You can't just barge in here," he barked, his voice cracking as he pointed a trembling finger at Anton. "This is a public store. I'm a paying customer, and I want these intruders removed immediately." Anton didn't flinch. With a surgical coldness, he pulled a slim tablet from his jacket and held it toward Gary's bulging eyes. The screen glowed with a digital deed, the header clear and undeniable, Sterling Luxury Complex. "Let me clarify the situation, Mr. Perkins," Anton said, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. "I don't just own this boutique. I own the land beneath it and every retail space in this district. You aren't a customer here. You are a trespasser on my private property." The silence that followed was suffocating as the realization hit Gary like a physical blow. He had just insulted the man who controlled the very ground he stood on. Anton's lead operative, a man with a face like carved granite, stepped forward from the human wall of black suits. Without a word, he began a live, surgical liquidation of Gary's life. Gary's phone, still gripped in his hand from his earlier attempt to record Karen's humiliation, suddenly vibrated with a violent, unending rhythm. His eyes widened as the screen flashed a series of red alerts. In a matter of seconds, his primary bank accounts were flagged and frozen. The digital numbers representing his stolen wealth turned to a static 0. The execution didn't stop there. A flood of termination of contract emails began to populate his notifications, each one a death knell for his business empire. Gary watched, paralyzed, as his prestigious partners, men he had courted for years, sent identical, cold dismissals, citing a total withdrawal of support. His intellectual property theft and fraud were being laid bare in the dark corners of the financial world with terrifying efficiency. The success he had used as a bludgeon against Karen was evaporating in the palm of his hand, leaving him with nothing but the expensive suit he wore and the crushing weight of Anton's cold, unblinking gaze. The air in the boutique grew thin as the silence became heavy with the sound of Gary's world collapsing into digital ash. The phone he had used as a weapon of humiliation slipped from his numb fingers, clattering onto the marble with a hollow sound. The arrogance that had inflated his chest only minutes ago vanished, leaving behind a man who looked suddenly small and utterly defeated. As the reality of his total liquidation took hold, Gary's legs finally betrayed him. He fell to his knees amidst the jagged shards of the porcelain vase he had shattered, his expensive trousers pressing into the debris. Tears of genuine terror tracked through his face as he reached out with trembling hands. "Karen, please," he croaked, his voice a pathetic rasp. "I didn't know. I'll do anything. Just don't let them take everything." Karen didn't flinch. Supported by the steady weight of Anton's hand on her shoulder, she stood tall. She looked down at him with a cold, surgical indifference that was devastating. From the safety of Anton's side, she watched him weep, her silence a final verdict on the man Gary used to be. The chaos of the boutique faded into a distant, muffled hum as Anton closed the distance between them. Without a word, he reached down and swept Karen into his arms, his grip firm and possessive. He refused to let her feet touch the cold marble floor or the debris Gary had scattered, carrying her as if she were the most fragile and precious object in the room. Behind them, Gary remained a broken figure on his knees, but Anton didn't spare him a final glance. As they stepped toward the waiting armored sedan, a familiar weight settled over Karen's shoulders. Anton settled her into the plush leather interior with meticulous care, but as the heavy door clicked shut, the sound echoed like a bolt sliding into place. The tinted windows erased the outside world, replacing the vibrant city with a hushed, climate-controlled silence. The tension between them was thick, she had called, and he had answered with the full weight of his power. Karen realized that while she had escaped Gary's cruelty, she was returning to the gilded cage of Anton's world, a sanctuary built on shadows that she had spent 6 months trying to flee. Would you like me to continue with Chapter 8, The Shadow Watcher? The heavy iron gates of the estate whispered shut, sealing them back into a world of manicured silence and absolute security. Inside the private study, the air smelled of aged leather and cold authority, a stark contrast to the chaotic boutique they had left behind. Karen stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, her hand resting on her stomach, watching the sunset bleed across the horizon. Anton stepped into the room, his presence commandingly still. He gestured toward a discreet console on his desk, revealing a bank of high-definition monitors. Karen's breath caught as she saw herself in a series of candid shots, at the grocery store, entering her apartment, and sitting on a park bench. In every frame, a subtle black car or a nondescript figure was positioned just a few yards away, a silent sentinel she had never noticed. "You think I could just let you walk away?" Anton's voice was a low rumble. He confessed to maintaining a ghost detail that followed her every move since the day she left. He had known Gary was a snake waiting to strike. While she had priding herself on her independence, Anton had been the invisible shield between her and the world. The shadows of the study seemed to lengthen, wrapping around them like a protective shroud as the weight of Anton's revelations settled in the room. Karen looked from the flickering monitors back to the man standing before her, the sharp edges of her resentment finally beginning to dull. For 6 months, she had viewed his power as a cage, a dark force she needed to escape to find peace. But the cold marble of the boutique and the memory of Gary's sneering face had taught her a brutal lesson. The world didn't respect the peace of the vulnerable. It only respected the strength of those who guarded it. She realized then that Anton's darkness, the very reach and ruthlessness she had fled, was the only reason her light had been allowed to exist at all. She turned away from the window, crossing the distance between them until she could feel the heat radiating from him. Her hand moved to her stomach, where their daughter gave a soft, reassuring flutter against her palm. Karen took Anton's hand, guiding his large, scarred fingers to rest over her own, bridging the gap between his world of shadows and the life they had created. There were no apologies needed, only an unspoken understanding of what was required to survive in a world filled with men like Gary. In that quiet, moonlit room, the air shifted from a sense of entrapment to one of absolute, ironclad devotion. They stood together as a unified front, a silent vow passing between them that needed no formal words. Their daughter would never know the coldness of a marble floor or the fear of a predator's shadow. She would grow up with the world's fiercest protector at her back, sheltered by a man who would burn down entire districts to keep her safe. The gilded cage had become a fortress, and as Anton pulled her close, Karen finally let go of the breath she had been holding for 6 long months.